The drill punched through the last meter of silicate crust, and the ground gave way beneath senior cataloger Vane Sorata's forward legs, dropping him chest-deep into a darkness that smelled of nothing at all. That was the first wrong thing. Every excavation site on a geologically active world carried a scent profile: mineral dust, trapped gas pockets, sulfur compounds, biological residue. This void smelled of absolute sterility, as though the air itself had been scrubbed molecule by molecule and then sealed away from entropy. Vane braced his rear legs against the crumbling lip of the hole and hauled himself up, his spiracles flaring with the effort. Around him, the survey team's equipment lay scattered across the plateau. A standard grid of subsurface imaging arrays, core samplers, and the big rotating drill that had just opened a passage into something the imaging had labeled as a natural cavern system. "Pull the drill back," Vane said. His voice came out steadier than he felt. "Get me a light probe, and someone check the imaging data again. I want to know why we're reading natural formation when there's clearly worked stone down there." His assistant, a young Cathari female named Dren, scrambled to the imaging console. Vane watched her crest feathers flatten in confusion as she scrolled through the data. "The subsurface return is clean, senior cataloger. Limestone karst, standard solution cavities, nothing anomalous." The computer classified it as a Category 2 natural void. "The computer is wrong." Vane crouched beside the hole and angled a handlight into the darkness. The beam caught the edge of something smooth, something geometric, a wall. Not rough limestone, not collapsed bedrock. A wall with a surface so precisely finished that the light reflected off it in a single clean plane. "That's machined stone. Somebody built this." The survey had been routine. 216 days cataloging geological features on neutral world 7741 Gamma, a planet claimed by no species, flagged by no prior expedition, interesting to no one. The conquered of elder races funded these surveys as academic busywork. Vane's people, the Cathari, had been running them for 11,000 years. Every inhabited world in the catalogued sphere bore the marks of Cathari exploration. They were the elder species, the first to achieve interstellar travel, the first to build lasting monuments among the stars, the first to understand that the universe was very old and very empty, and that civilizations rose and fell in the dark like sparks from a fire, each one brief and local. Vane had spent his career proving that thesis. 42 years of survey work across 300 worlds, and every ruin he had ever catalogued fit the pattern. Younger species, shorter histories, less sophisticated engineering. The Cathari had come first. Everything else was an echo. So when the light probe returned images of a corridor stretching 40 meters into the bedrock, lined with panels of polished basalt, and fitted with mechanical joints that appeared functional, Vane felt the first tick of professional excitement he had experienced in a decade. Not because the find was impossible. Impossible things did not exist in his vocabulary, but because it was unexplained. Something had been built here, on a world with no recorded inhabitants, using construction techniques that did not match any species in the conquered database. "We go in," he told the team. "Standard archaeological protocol. Dren, you're on documentation. Paleth, bring the materials scanner. Ren, stay topside with the relay. Everyone else holds the surface camp and monitors comm channels." Paleth, the team's engineer, was already calibrating the scanner. He was older than Dren, steadier, and he handled the equipment with the methodical care of someone who had seen enough dig sites to know that surprises were usually unpleasant. "The corridor angles downward," he noted, studying the probe data. "Roughly 12 degrees. If the grade holds, we'll be 60 meters below surface within the first 100 meters of horizontal travel." "Noted." Vane clipped his personal recorder to the ridge of his thorax and stepped into the hole. The corridor was wide enough for 3 Cathari to walk abreast, and tall enough that Vane's crest cleared the ceiling with room to spare. The basalt panels were seamless. No visible mortar, no fasteners, no gaps. Someone had cut them to tolerances that Vane's scanner measured in fractions of a micron, and then fitted them together with a precision that bordered on the molecular. The surface was cool under his manipulators, dry, and so smooth it felt almost liquid. "Age?" he asked Paleth. The engineer ran the scanner along the nearest panel and then ran it again, adjusting the calibration by hand, frowning at the readout as though it had insulted him. "The instrument is giving me a number I don't trust." "Report it." 47,000 years, plus or minus 800. Vane stopped walking. 47,000 years predated every known spacefaring species except the Cathari themselves. And the Cathari had never built on this world. His own survey records confirmed it. He pulled up the expedition's master database on his tablet, cross-referencing the planetary coordinates against the full Cathari colonial archive. Nothing. No base, no way station, no probe, no landing record. The world was listed as untouched. "Run it again, different calibration protocol." Paleth did. He ran it 3 more times using 3 different isotopic decay methods. Each one converged on the same window, 47,200 years within the same margin of 8 centuries. The basalt was local stone, quarried and finished in place, and the isotopic ratios were unambiguous. Whatever had built this corridor had done so nearly 50 millennia ago, on a world that the Concord's records showed as perpetually uninhabited. "We have a genuine anomaly," Vane said, and despite himself, the words carried a tremor of something close to awe. He pushed deeper. The corridor ran straight for 80 meters, featureless and clean, before ending at a wall of the same polished basalt. In the center of the wall was a door. Not a symbolic threshold, not a carved archway, a mechanical door, set on hinges that Vane could see were designed to support enormous weight while distributing load across multiple pivot points. The engineering was elegant. Vane's people could have built something functionally similar, but the design choices were alien. The hinge geometry was different. The proportions were different. The whole philosophy of how force should move through a structural joint was different from anything Cathari engineers had ever conceived. The pivot bearings showed no corrosion. After 47,000 years, they were still factory bright. Dren documented the hinge mechanism in minute detail while Vane studied the door's surface. It was covered with incised markings, not decorative, not writing. Diagrams. He recognized the format instinctively, the way any scientist would. These were technical drawings, cross-sections of something mechanical, mathematical relationships expressed in a notational system he had never seen. Beside them, a series of unit marks arranged in groups. He counted them automatically, groups of 10. "The notation," Dren said quietly, her feathers drawn tight against her skull. "It's base 10. Vane stared at her. The Cathari used base 12. Every species in the Concord used either base 8, base 12, or base 16, corresponding to the number of manipulator digits each species possessed. Base 10 was the province of one species only, and that species was not considered a serious subject of archaeological study. "That's not possible," he said. "The notation is base 10, senior cataloger. I can show you the counting sequence in the upper left panel. Unit marks grouped in sets of 10, with positional notation carrying through powers of 10. It's unambiguous." Vane pushed the door. It did not move. He pushed harder, leaning his full mass against it, and felt the hinges take his weight without yielding a millimeter. The mechanism was locked, not rusted shut, not seized from age, but deliberately locked, as though someone had expected exactly this moment and had decided in advance that force alone should not suffice. Then he noticed the depression in the center of the door, a shape recessed into the basalt, clearly meant to receive something. The depression was the size and rough shape of a hand. Not a Cathari manipulator, not a Dreth grasping appendage, not a velour adhesion pad, a hand. 5 digits, arranged in a pattern that Vane recognized from xenobiology survey data, the gross anatomy of a human hand. "Paleth," he said, "what is the surveyed population of humans in the Concord?" 12 billion, give or take. They've been spacefaring for roughly 400 years. And before that? Planet-bound, a single-system species. Their recorded history extends back perhaps 10,000 years, with archaeological evidence of organized civilization going back roughly 12,000. Not 47,000. No, not by a factor of 4. Vane placed his manipulator against the hand-shaped depression, and it was too narrow, the wrong shape, the digits too many. The door remained sealed. He stepped back and stared at it, and for the first time in 42 years of field work, he did not know what he was looking at. "We need to find another way in," he said. It took the team 6 hours to locate the secondary entrance, a vertical shaft concealed beneath a rockfall 200 meters east of the primary bore. The shaft dropped straight down for 30 meters, fitted with the same precision basalt, and opened into a chamber that Vane's light could not fully illuminate. It was vast. The ceiling arched overhead at a height he estimated at 20 meters, supported by pillars that rose from the floor in clean geometric columns. And the walls were covered floor to ceiling, pillar to pillar in diagrams. Vane walked to the nearest wall and raised his light, and his chest constricted. He was looking at a star chart. Not a decorative mosaic of the heavens, not a mythological sky map. A navigational chart, precise enough to identify individual stellar objects, annotated with coordinate data in the same Baseline notation Dren had identified above. He traced the coordinate system with his manipulators and found reference markers that allowed him to orient the chart against known stellar positions. The chart depicted this region of the galaxy as it had appeared 47,000 years ago, corrected for stellar drift. Vane ran the corrections himself on his tablet, checking the incised positions against projected historical locations of known stars. The accuracy was extraordinary, within the margin of observational precision. Whoever had carved this map had possessed instrumentation comparable to, or better, than modern Concord astronomical arrays. And scattered across the chart, marked with a symbol that appeared nowhere else in the notation, were 17 points, 17 star systems. "Colonies," Dren whispered beside him. "These are colony markers." Vane did not answer. He was counting the systems, cross-referencing them against his memory of the modern galactic map. 7 of the 17 marked systems currently hosted populations of a species that called itself humanity. The other 10 were either uninhabited or had been claimed by conquered member species within the last few thousand years. 3 of them were Cathari colony worlds, worlds his own people had settled in the belief that they were the first intelligent beings to set foot there. He moved to the next wall. More diagrams. These were engineering specifications. Detailed cross-sections of what appeared to be a propulsion system, annotated with measurements that Vane's engineering knowledge told him described something capable of sustained superluminal travel. The design was unlike any drive system in the modern Concord catalog. Different principles, different energy sources, different mathematical frameworks for modeling spacetime interaction. Paleth studied the specifications in silence for several minutes, then sat down on the floor with a heaviness that had nothing to do with gravity. "This is a working drive design," the engineer said. His voice was flat. "I can follow the mathematics. The energy extraction method is different from ours, fundamentally different, not an improvement on the same principle but an entirely separate approach to the same problem. And it works. I can see that it works." "How do you know it works?" Vane asked. "Because the mathematics is self-consistent and because I can identify the test data." Paleth pointed to a series of smaller diagrams below the main specifications. "These aren't theoretical projections. These are performance logs, measured velocities, measured energy consumption, measured transit times between specific star systems. They built this drive. They flew it. They recorded the results and carved them into a wall. And it was old, 47,000 years old, built into the wall of a chamber on a world that the conquered called empty, by a species that the conquered considered young. Senior cataloger, Paleth's voice came from deeper in the chamber, where he had moved while Vane was still absorbing the drive specifications. You need to see this. Vane followed the engineer's voice to the far wall, where the basalt gave way to a different material, a metal that the scanner identified as an alloy with no match in the conquered materials database. The alloy was dense, dark, and when Vane touched it, faintly warm. Set into the metal wall was another door, and this one was different from the first. It was smaller, lower, and framed with an array of mechanisms that Vane recognized with a chill. Pressure plates set into the floor in front of it, counterweights visible through narrow inspection slits in the wall, and channels cut into the stone floor that led to reservoirs concealed behind the basalt. It's a test, Paleth said. The mechanisms are designed to respond to physical input. Step on the wrong plate and something happens. The channels suggest fluid dynamics, possibly a flooding system. Step on the right ones in the right sequence and the door opens. How do you know which sequence? Paleth pointed to the diagram, incised above the door frame. It showed a figure, a biped, clearly human in proportion, with 5-fingered hands and a gait that matched human locomotion studies, walking a specific path across the floor, stepping on specific plates in a specific order. The path formed a mathematical sequence. Based in. The sequence is a prime number series, Dren said, reading the notation. She had been studying the ceiling panels, which contained what appeared to be a decoder key for the notational system. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23. Each number corresponds to a plate position. Walk the primes and the door opens. Walk them wrong, Vane asked. Paleth knelt beside one of the channels and shone his light into it. The beam reflected off a dark liquid surface, perhaps 2 meters below the floor level. The flooding system holds a liquid I can't fully identify from here. The scanner reads it as a high-density compound with a pH that would dissolve organic tissue in seconds. The channels are designed to fill this chamber to ceiling height in approximately 40 seconds. Whatever the liquid is, the builders did not intend for wrong answers to be survivable. Vane stood at the threshold and studied the floor. 26 plates arranged in a grid, each one recessed slightly into the basalt, each one connected by visible mechanical linkages to the counterweight system in the walls. The plates were spaced for a human stride, shorter than a Cathari's natural gait, narrower than a Cathari's stance. A human could walk this grid at a comfortable pace, stepping naturally from prime to prime. A Cathari would have to compress his stride, tuck his rear legs, and move with an awkward, mincing precision that was the opposite of natural. And that was the point. That was what this place was. This isn't a ruin, Vane said. His voice sounded distant to his own ears. This is a vault. A locked vault built by humans, 47,000 years before humans were supposed to exist as a technological species, and the lock is set to human parameters. He stepped onto the first plate before Paleth could stop him. The plate sank under his weight with a mechanical click that echoed through the chamber. A low vibration ran through the floor, the counterweights adjusting, the mechanism acknowledging the input. Nothing lethal happened. The plate simply accepted his weight and held. But through the channels, Vane heard the liquid shift, heard it rise slightly in its reservoir, and understood that the system was now armed. One wrong step and the chamber would fill. Plate 2, Vane said, and stepped to the next position in the prime sequence. Another click, another vibration. The liquid rose another centimeter in the channels, visible now, dark and faintly luminous, lapping at the edges of its containment. By the 5th plate, his legs were shaking. not from fear, but from the strain of adjusting his gait to a stride pattern designed for a species half his height. His rear legs wanted to stabilize him, wanted to find their natural spacing, but the plates were too close together and too narrow. He felt like a giant trying to walk a child's stepping stone path, each step requiring a conscious override of his body's instincts. 7, he counted. 11, 13. Each plate clicked and held. The floor beneath the unchosen plates remained inert, but the liquid in the channels had risen to floor level now, a dark meniscus gleaming between the plates, filling the gaps, turning the grid into an archipelago of safe stone in a rising tide of corrosive fluid. One misstep would put his foot into the liquid instead of onto the next plate. 17, 19. 2 plates left. His forward left leg was cramping from the compressed stride. He shifted his weight, miscalculated the distance, and his foot hovered over the space between plates 19 and 23, over a plate that was not in the sequence. The liquid below it bubbled faintly, as though anticipating contact. Paleth shouted from behind him. Dren's feathers flared white with alarm. Vane pulled his leg back, steadied himself on 3 legs with the 4th held trembling in the air, and placed it carefully on 23. The click was louder this time, resonant, and it was followed by a sound like a held breath being released, a deep mechanical exhalation from inside the walls. The liquid began to drain, receding through the channels with a rushing whisper, and the second door swung inward on counterweighted hinges, smooth and silent, revealing a passage that descended at a steeper angle than the first. He stood trembling at the threshold and looked back at his team. Dren's eyes were wide, her crest feathers standing straight up. Paleth was gripping the material scanner with both manipulators. The builders were human, Vane said. 47,000 years ago. That predates everything we thought we knew about their species. It predates everything we thought we knew about ourselves, Paleth said quietly. The Cathari achieved interstellar travel 44,000 years ago. If these dates are correct, then humans were building vaults with superluminal drive specifications 3,000 years before we left our homeworld. Vane did not respond to that. He could not. The sentence contained an implication that his mind was not yet willing to process, that the species his civilization had treated as young, primitive, a latecomer to the galactic stage, had in fact preceded them, that the Cathari were not the elder race, that they never had been. He descended. The passage led to a second chamber, smaller than the first but no less precisely built. The walls here were paneled not in basalt but in the unknown alloy, and the test was different. The floor was a grid of metal panels, each one inscribed with a symbol from the Bayesian notation system. Above the far door, a mathematical equation was displayed in the incised diagrams. Not a simple sequence this time, but a differential equation, its terms expressed in a notation that was both foreign and, as Vane studied it, disturbingly elegant. The equation described something physical, a relationship between energy, mass, and spatial curvature that Vane recognized as related to the superluminal drive specifications on the walls above. It's a boundary value problem, Dren said, standing at the edge of the grid. The solution is a specific numerical value. The panels on the floor represent digits. You have to step on the digits of the answer in order. Can you solve it? Dren studied the equation for a long time. Her manipulators moved through the notation, tracing the terms, identifying the operators. I can solve it, she said, but the answer is expressed in base 10. I need to convert my solution from base 12 to match the panels. Do it. She worked the math on her tablet, converting between number bases with the mechanical precision of someone who had studied alien mathematical systems as an academic exercise, and was now discovering that the exercise had been preparation for something real. The equation was not simple. It required 3 substitutions and a convergence check that she ran twice to be certain. It took her 4 minutes. The answer is 7.389056, she said. In their notation, the sequence of plates would be 7389056. Vane looked at the grid. The panels were spaced for a human stride again, but this time the spacing was slightly wider, as though the builders had anticipated that the solver might be moving quickly, might be focused on the mathematics rather than on foot placement. The channels in the walls were visible here too, wider than the ones above, and through one of them Vane could see a dark liquid surface glinting at a level already higher than it had been in the first chamber. The margin for error was smaller. The builders were increasing the stakes. "I'll walk it," he said. "Senior cataloger, the spacing is wrong for your gate. Let me." "You weigh half what I do, Dren. If the plates are weight-sensitive as well as position-sensitive, a lighter body might not register. I'll walk it." He stepped onto the 7. Click. The counterweights shifted. 3. Click. 890. The 0 plate was at the far edge of the grid, requiring him to stretch across 2 empty panels, and for a moment he was balanced on a single foreleg with his full body weight cantilevered over panels he did not dare touch. He felt the mechanism beneath the floor shift, felt the pressure in the channels build, heard the liquid begin to rise, not slowly this time but with purposeful speed, flooding the gaps between panels in seconds, turning the grid into stepping stones in a rising toxic pool. 5. His foot slipped on the panel's polished surface. For one heartbeat, he felt his weight transfer to his rear leg, felt his center of gravity shift toward the gap between 5 and 6, where the liquid now stood at the height of the panel edges, and he drove his manipulators into the wall for purchase and hauled himself forward. 6. The door opened. The sound was different this time, not a mechanical exhalation but a harmonic tone, a low resonant note that filled the chamber and faded slowly, as though the vault itself were acknowledging that the correct answer had been given. Vane's spiracles constricted. The tone was pitched for human hearing ranges, a frequency band centered on what xenobiologists called the human emotional register, the range within which acoustic signals triggered the strongest effective response in human neural architecture. Even through his different auditory anatomy, the tone carried an emotional weight that he recognized as intentional. The builders had wanted the solver to feel something at this threshold. They had wanted the door to sing. The 3rd chamber held the next test, and this one nearly killed him. The room was circular, 15 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling that displayed an incised diagram of the 17 colony systems from the star chart above. Vane stood at the threshold and felt the scale of the engineering press against him. The dome was a single piece of carved stone, seamless, its interior surface polished to the same impossible smoothness as every other surface in the vault. The colonnade behind them was already lost in darkness. They were deep now, perhaps 70 meters below the surface, and the weight of the plateau sat above them like a held fist. In the center of the room stood a pedestal bearing a mechanical device, a series of concentric rings, each one free to rotate independently, each one inscribed with symbols and numbers in the Baseden notation. An orrery of some kind, but not a model of celestial bodies. A lock. The rings were nested inside each other with machining tolerances so fine that Vane could not see the gaps between them without magnification. Each ring bore 60 divisions, 12 Baseden characters repeated 5 times around the circumference, and each division was marked with a detent that would hold the ring in position once set. The instructions were carved into the pedestal's base in the same logographic script. Dren translated them while Vane's legs still shook from the previous chamber, the muscles of his forelegs twitching from the strain of a stride pattern that was not his own. "Align the rings to display a specific date," she said. "The date is encoded in the star chart on the ceiling. It's the angular position of a particular star relative to 2 reference points, which corresponds to a specific moment in time. When the rings display the correct date, the next door opens. And if the rings are set wrong, Paleth had been examining the dome's circumference, running his manipulators along the junction lines between the dome's segments. He turned back with an expression that Vane had never seen on the phlegmatic engineer's face before, something close to fear. "The dome is segmented," he said. 8 panels, hinged at the top. If the rings are set incorrectly, the panels drop inward. Each one weighs approximately 400 kilograms. The room becomes a crusher. Vane looked up at the dome. 8 polished basalt panels, each one suspended on the same corrosion-proof hinges he had admired at the entrance. Beautiful engineering turned to lethal purpose. If the panels fell, they would slam inward simultaneously from all directions, meeting in the center where the solver would be standing. The pedestal was the only object in the room. There was nowhere to take cover. The geometry was precise. The panels were sized and angled so that their inner edges would converge at exactly the height of a standing human figure. Not a Cathari figure, a human one. "Senior cataloger," Dren added. "I should note that the failure mode appears to be on a timer. These marks on the pedestal's base, they indicate a countdown. Once the first ring is moved, the solver has a fixed interval to complete the sequence. Based on the notation, I estimate approximately 90 seconds. 90 seconds to set 4 rings. Yes, the countdown is not time to think. It's time to act. The builders assumed the solver would have already calculated the date before touching the rings." "The date," Vane said. "Can you calculate it before I touch anything?" Dren studied the star chart on the dome for 20 minutes, cross-referencing positions, computing angular separations, converting between the builder's coordinate system and standard astronomical notation. Vane watched the calculations accumulate on her tablet and forced himself to breathe evenly. Paleth paced the circumference of the room, measuring the dome panels, calculating their drop velocity, reporting his findings in a voice that grew quieter with each number. 400 kilograms per panel, falling from a height of approximately 6 meters along a hinged arc. Impact velocity at center point would be roughly 11 meters per second. Survival is not a reasonable expectation. "I have it," Dren said. "The target date is 47,318 years before present. The first ring gets the millennia. The second gets the centuries. The third gets the decades and years. Fourth is a verification ring. It displays a checksum of the other 3. What happened 47,318 years ago?" Dren checked her notes. Her crest feathers twitched, a Cathari gesture of reluctant certainty. "Based on the colony chart, that's the date the 17th colony was established. The last one before they sealed everything. They wanted anyone who reached this room to know what they were commemorating," Vane said. "The date of their last expansion, the moment before the contraction began." He stepped to the pedestal and reviewed the ring positions with Dren one final time, memorizing the exact settings for each ring, the exact checksum value for the 4th. Then he reached for the first ring. The moment his manipulator touched the alloy, the dome above him emitted a low tone, not the singing harmonic of the previous door, but a deeper, more ominous frequency. A warning. The countdown had begun. He set the first ring. A vibration ran through the floor, the dome's panels shifting in their frames, testing their hinges, ready to fall. Second ring. The vibration intensified. Somewhere above him, counterweights slid along tracks with a sound like stone grinding against stone. The dome panels lowered a centimeter, then another. Third ring. A grinding sound from the dome. The panels had begun to descend in earnest, lowering by visible increments, the room contracting around him. He could see the gaps between panels narrowing as they rotated inward on their hinges, the lower edges now aimed at the point where he stood. Dust sifted down from the junction lines. The first particles of debris in a structure that had been perfectly clean for 47 millennia, shaken loose by mechanisms finally executing their long-delayed function. Fourth ring. Checksum. Dren called out the number and Vane spun the ring with trembling manipulators, aligning the symbol, feeling the mechanism resist for one agonizing second, the detent sticking, the alloy warm and unyielding under his grip, before the alignment clicked home with a sound like a bone setting. The panel stopped, the grinding ceased. Silence filled the room like water filling a vessel, absolute and sudden, and then a section of the circular wall simply slid aside. No hinges, no sound, just a mass of polished stone moving on hidden tracks with a precision that made the motion look effortless. The dome panels retracted to their original positions above him, resetting the trap for whoever might come next. Beyond the opening, a passage descended into amber light. The fourth chamber was the deepest. The passage from the crushing room descended at 20 degrees for 50 meters before opening into a space that was not a room at all. It was a hall, a cathedral. The ceiling vaulted overhead at a height that Vane's instruments measured at 40 meters, supported by a colonnade of pillars that receded into the amber darkness in every direction. The air was warm here for the first time, not the dead sterility of the upper levels, but a warmth that felt alive, as though something in this space was generating heat the way a body generated heat. And at the center of the hall, elevated on a plinth of the same polished basalt, was the artifact. It was a sphere, 2 meters in diameter, constructed from the unknown alloy, and its surface was covered every square centimeter with incised text. Not diagrams, not mathematics. Writing. Dense, small, precise, covering the sphere in a continuous spiral that began at the top and wound downward to the base. Vane did not recognize the script, but the scanner identified it as a logographic system. Each character represented a word or concept, not a phoneme. The system contained over 12,000 unique characters. And the sphere was active. A light burned inside it, not bright, not flickering, but steady. A warm amber glow that radiated through the alloy and cast the surrounding pillars in long, soft shadows. 47,000 years underground, sealed behind 3 lethal tests, and the sphere was still lit, still powered by whatever source its builders had installed, still warm to the touch when Vane climbed the plinth and placed his manipulators on its surface. The alloy was warm in the way that living things were warm, with a thermal signature that suggested active processes occurring beneath the skin. He pressed his scanner against it and watched the data scroll, and what the scanner told him made his manipulators go still. The sphere contained a data storage medium of a type the scanner could not fully characterize. The storage density was orders of magnitude beyond anything in the Concord's technology base, beyond anything the Concord's theoretical models predicted was possible. And the data it held, the scanner could not read the content, but it could measure the volume, was equivalent to the combined archives of the entire Concord of elder races. Every scientific paper, every historical record, every navigational chart, every engineering specification produced by all 12 member species over 11,000 years of collective spacefaring civilization. The sphere held that much data and more. It was a library, a single object containing the complete knowledge of a civilization that had existed 47 millennia ago, a civilization that should not have existed, a human civilization. Vane sat on the edge of the plinth and stared into the amber glow. Around him, the hall stretched into darkness, its pillars standing like sentinels in the warm light, and the silence was so deep that he could hear his own circulatory system pulsing through the membranes of his spiracles. Everything he had believed was wrong. Not wrong in the way that a flawed hypothesis was wrong, correctable, refinable, a matter of adjusting parameters and publishing an erratum. Wrong in the way that a foundation was wrong. The Cathari had built their entire cultural identity on the premise of primacy. We were first. We were the elder race. Everything else came after. Every diplomatic relationship, every treaty, every academic institution, every hierarchy within the Concord rested on that premise. The Cathari sat at the head of the table, because they had arrived at the table first. And they hadn't. The evidence was carved into stone around him, stone that was older than Cathari civilization itself. He had spent 42 years cataloging 300 worlds to confirm a conclusion that a single drill bore on an unclaimed planet had just demolished. Vane pressed his manipulators against his face and breathed through his spiracles and tried to think clearly. The dates were unambiguous. The engineering was real and verifiable. The mathematics on the walls was internally consistent and externally checkable. The star charts matched known stellar positions when corrected for drift. The drive specifications described physically plausible superluminal propulsion. The test mechanisms functioned exactly as designed after 47,000 years of dormancy. The sphere contained a volume of data that no pre-technological species could produce. 47,000 years ago, while the Cathari were still building their first permanent structures on their homeworld, still learning to smelt metal and domesticate food crops, humans had been here, building vaults, storing knowledge, mapping the stars, traveling between them. And then Vane looked around the hall, at the pristine walls, the undisturbed pillars, the sealed doors with their lethal tests. They had locked it all away and disappeared. Not gradually, not through decline or collapse, but deliberately. They had built a vault, filled it with everything they knew, sealed it with tests that only their own kind could reasonably pass. And then they had erased every trace of themselves from the galactic stage, so thoroughly that 11,000 years of Cathari survey work across 300 worlds had never found a single sign of their existence. Until now. Until a routine drill on an unclaimed world punched through the ceiling of something that should not exist. Senior cataloger. Dren's voice was small in the enormous space. She had been walking the perimeter of the hall while Vane sat with the sphere, documenting the pillars and the walls, and her voice carried the particular quality of someone who had found something they wished they hadn't. There is a fifth door. Vane looked where she was pointing. Beyond the sphere's plinth at the far end of the hall, the colonnade ended at a wall of the unknown alloy, and set into it was a door identical to the first one he had encountered at the main entrance. Hand-shaped depression. 5 human digits. No alternative mechanism. No mathematical test. No sequence of plates. No alignable rings. Just a lock that required one thing, a human hand. This one can't be solved, Vane said. It requires a human. Yes. He walked to the door and stood before it. The depression was shallow, clean-edged, clearly designed to read the precise geometry of a human palm and fingers. No Cathari manipulator could simulate it. No prosthetic would carry the right thermal signature, the right electrical conductivity, the right biological markers that the mechanism was almost certainly calibrated to detect. The builders had carved the mathematical tests into universal language. Any species with sufficient intelligence could solve them. But this gate was not a test of intelligence. It was a test of identity. The vault had been built for humans. The tests could be solved by a sufficiently intelligent non-human. The mathematics was universal. The prime sequences transcended species. The star chart dating required only astronomical knowledge. But this final gate was a biological lock. It required human flesh, human identity, human inheritance. Vane pressed his manipulator against the depression anyway, knowing it would not work, unable to stop himself from trying. The alloy was warm under his touch but inert. Nothing happened. No click, no vibration, no harmonic tone. The door remained sealed, indifferent to the wrong species pressing against it. He held his manipulator there for a long moment, feeling the warmth of the ancient metal, feeling the weight of what it meant. The vault's builders had anticipated this exact scenario, a non-human species finding the vault, solving the tests, reaching this door and being stopped. They had designed the experience deliberately. The journey through the chambers was not meant to keep outsiders away. It was meant to educate them. to show them the star charts, the drive specifications, the engineering, the mathematics, to prove beyond any reasonable doubt what the builders had been capable of, what they had achieved, what they had chosen to leave behind. And then to close the final door in their faces and say, "Now you know what we were, but what we left behind is not for you." He turned away and walked back to the sphere. The amber light fell across his thorax, warm and steady, and in that light he could see the incised text more clearly, thousands upon thousands of logographic characters spiraling down the sphere's surface, each one precise, each one representing a concept in a language he could not read, written by hands that had preceded his species' first breath of civilization. "Dren," he said, "I want you to document everything in this hall. Every wall, every pillar, every character on this sphere. Full spectral imaging, full geometric mapping, everything. We have weeks of work ahead of us." "And the fifth door?" Vane looked at the sealed alloy wall. Behind it lay whatever the vault's builders had considered worth protecting more thoroughly than a complete civilizational archive. Something that required not just intelligence but identity, not just solving the test but being the right species. "The fifth door isn't ours to open," he said. "It never was." He sat in the amber light and began to dictate his preliminary findings into the recorder. The words came slowly, because each one required him to dismantle a piece of the framework he had built his career on. Each sentence was a small act of demolition. Each paragraph, a load-bearing wall removed from a structure he had spent a lifetime constructing. Preliminary field report. Neutral world 7741 Gamma. Subsurface complex. Depth approximately 110 meters. The structure is artificial, constructed approximately 47,000 years before present, predating Cathari interstellar capability by a minimum of 3,000 years. Construction materials include local basalt finish to submicron tolerances and an alloy of unknown composition with no match in the conquered materials database. The complex contains navigational charts depicting 17 star systems with colony markers, engineering specifications for a functional superluminal propulsion system, and a data storage device of extraordinary capacity, estimated equivalent to the full combined archives of the conquered of elder races. All notation systems are based in all anthropometric dimensions, door heights, corridor widths, floor panel spacing, handprint mechanisms, stride intervals on the test grids, correspond to human physiological parameters. He paused. The next sentence was the hardest thing he had ever said into a recording device. "The evidence indicates that humans, the species currently classified by the conquered, as a young, recently spacefaring civilization with approximately 400 years of interstellar history, achieved interstellar technology, and constructed permanent installations in this region of the galaxy approximately 47,000 years ago, placing them among the earliest known spacefaring species and predating Cathari spaceflight by at least 3 millennia. The Cathari classification as the elder race is, based on this evidence, incorrect." Dren had stopped documenting. She was standing at the base of the plinth, looking up at him with an expression he had never seen on a Cathari face before, not shock, not denial, but something more complicated. Something that looked like the beginning of a question that had no comfortable answer. "The question that follows," Vane continued into the recorder, "is not why this complex exists. The evidence is clear on that point. It is a sealed repository of civilizational knowledge, a time capsule of extraordinary sophistication. The question is why humans abandoned it. Why they sealed their knowledge in a vault beneath an unmarked world, locked it with tests calibrated to their own biology, erased every surface trace of their presence across at least 17 star systems, and then, by every available indication, allowed themselves to regress, allowed their civilization to contract from interstellar capability to planetary confinement, allowed 47,000 years of history to pass until they re-emerged as a seemingly new spacefaring species, with no apparent memory of what they had been. He looked at the sphere. The amber light was unchanging, patient, as though it could burn for another 47,000 years without diminishing. This was not a collapse, he said. Collapsed civilizations leave debris. They leave orbiting infrastructure, contaminated atmospheres, cratered surfaces, irradiated soil, the wreckage of wars or pandemics or environmental failure. There is none of that here or on any of the 17 charted systems. The vault is intact, sealed, and still fully operational. The tests function as designed. The data storage device is still powered and thermally active. This was planned. They chose to put themselves away. The silence of the hall pressed in around him like something with weight. A further question, Vane said, is what purpose this vault ultimately serves. If the builders intended to preserve their knowledge through a period of voluntary regression, then this complex is not a tomb. It is not a memorial. It is a message left for a future version of themselves, a version that would eventually redevelop spacefaring capability, rediscover this world, and possess the biological key to open the fifth door and reclaim what was locked inside. He turned and looked at the sealed alloy wall. Behind it, something waited. Something the ancient humans had locked away not from the galaxy but from themselves, from the version of humanity that had decided to start over, to climb the ladder again from the bottom rung, to earn the right to return. The vault was not built for us, Vane said into the recorder. It was not built for the Cathari or for any conquered species. The tests admit intelligence regardless of species. The mathematics is universal. The prime sequences are solvable by any sufficiently advanced mind. But the final lock is biological. The vault invites understanding and refuses access. It says, you may know that this exists. You may know what we were, but you may not have what we left behind. That belongs to our children. He switched off the recorder and sat in the amber glow, and the cathedral hummed around him, the faintest vibration, barely perceptible through the basalt, as though the sphere's power source resonated at a frequency just below hearing. The sound of a library waiting to be read by the only people who had ever been meant to read it. Vane thought about the conquered, about the council chamber on Cathari Prime where the 12-member species met under a ceiling mosaic that depicted the Cathari diaspora, the first ships, the first colonies, the first contact with younger races. The mosaic told the story of the elder race bringing order to an empty galaxy. It was the founding myth of Cathari civilization, and it was painted on the ceiling of the room where every galactic decision was made. The mosaic was wrong. The galaxy had not been empty. The first ships had not been Cathari, and the species that had actually preceded them, that had mapped the stars and traveled between them and built monuments beneath alien worlds and then chosen, for reasons no one yet understood, to erase themselves and start again, was the species that currently occupied the smallest, most recently granted seats in the conquered chamber. He had spent his career telling a story. The story said, the Cathari are the eldest, and that is why we lead. He had believed the story not because it was comfortable, though it was comfortable, but because every piece of evidence he had ever collected supported it. 300 worlds, 42 years, not a single contradicting data point. The story had been consistent. It had been so thoroughly confirmed that Vane had stopped treating it as a hypothesis and started treating it as a fact, a foundation, something as reliable as gravity. That was the mistake, the methodological error that no amount of experience excused. He had stopped testing the premise and started defending it. He had looked at 300 worlds and seen confirmation, because confirmation was all he had been looking for. A well-funded, well-trained survey program, the best in the conquered, the pride of Cathari science, had spent 11,000 years mapping the galaxy and had never found this vault because no one had ever been looking for it. They had been looking for younger civilizations, shorter histories, less sophisticated ruins. They had been looking for echoes of themselves, and that was all they had found. The drill that punched through this ceiling had not been guided by a competing hypothesis. It had been guided by blind luck, a routine survey, a standard drill placement on a grid chosen for geological coverage, not archaeological investigation. An accident. If the drill had been positioned 50 meters in any other direction, this vault would still be sealed. The Cathari would still be the elder race, the story would still be intact, and it would still be wrong. Paleth, Vane said without opening his eyes. When we return to the surface, I need you to prepare a full data package, all scanner readings, all imaging, all documentation, all test records, triple redundant storage on independent media. This goes to the Conquered Science Authority by priority transmission, and I want it cryptographically signed and timestamped before we transmit so that no one can claim we altered the data after the fact. They won't believe it, Paleth said. No, they won't. Not immediately. They'll send verification teams, Cathari teams first, then independent auditors from other species. They'll challenge the dating methods. They'll propose alternative explanations, a younger species mimicking base-10 notation, natural formations that coincidentally resemble machined stone, instrument error in the material scanner, contamination of the isotopic samples. They'll work through every objection in the catalog because the alternative is accepting that the Cathari are not the elder race, and that alternative restructures everything. Every treaty, every hierarchy, every seat at the table. And when the objections run out, Vane opened his eyes and looked at the sphere. It sat on its plinth in its amber glow, patient, indifferent, holding its cargo of ancient knowledge in the dark. It had been waiting for 47,000 years. It could wait longer. It had been built to wait. When the objections run out, he said, then someone will come here who can open the fifth door. Someone with the right hand, the right biology, the right inheritance, a human. And whatever the builders locked behind that door, whatever they considered important enough to preserve through a voluntary dark age, important enough to protect with mechanisms that kill the wrong answer, important enough to lock behind a gate that answers only to their own flesh, that will be theirs to find. He walked back across the hall toward the passage that led to the surface. His legs ached from walking floors designed for shorter strides, from compressing his gait through tests built for another species' body. His spiracles burned from hours of breathing air that had been sealed away longer than his species had possessed written language. And the knowledge he carried, the simple, devastating knowledge that the Cathari had not been first, sat in his chest like a stone he would carry for the rest of his career and would never be able to set down. At the base of the passage, he stopped and turned back one last time. The hall stretched behind him, pillars receding into the amber dark, the sphere glowing at its center like a heart that had never stopped beating. It was beautiful. The proportions were alien, the mathematics foreign, the engineering strange. But it was beautiful in the way that all real things were beautiful, with the beauty of something that existed because someone had needed it to exist, and had possessed the skill to make it real and the wisdom to know it should endure. "Dren," he said, "one more entry for the documentation." "Yes, Senior Cataloger." Vane looked at the sphere one last time. The amber light held steady, warm, ancient, alive. "Log the question," he said. "The question that every conquered scientist is going to ask when they see this data, and the question that I suspect the builders intended us to ask." He paused. The light did not waver. Why did they stop? They were here first. They had the technology, the knowledge, the infrastructure. 17 colony worlds, superluminal travel, a data archive that exceeds our combined civilizational output. They had everything. And they chose to put it all in a box, lock the box, bury it under a world no one would visit, and start over from nothing. From stone tools and campfires and 10,000 years of relearning what they had already known. His voice was steady now, but the steadiness cost him something he would never fully recover. That is not the behavior of a species that failed. That is the behavior of a species that decided something. And whatever they decided, whatever drove the first spacefaring civilization in this galaxy to voluntarily dismantle itself and begin again from the ground, the answer is behind a door that only they can open. And when they come back for it, we will not be standing at the head of the table. We will be standing where we always should have been, beside them, looking up, wondering what they knew that made them choose to forget. He turned and climbed toward the surface. The sunlight at the top of the shaft was white and harsh after the amber warmth of the vault, and when Vane emerged onto the plateau, the survey camp looked small and temporary, equipment scattered across bare rock under an alien sky, a handful of Kethari scientists standing beside machines that suddenly felt very new and very young. Paleth emerged behind him, then Dren, blinking in the daylight, her crest feathers still pressed flat against her skull in an expression that Vane now recognized as permanent. The look of someone whose understanding of the universe had been rearranged at the foundation level, and who knew it would never settle back into the shape it had held before. "Senior cataloger," she said, "what do we tell the conquered?" Vane looked out across the plateau. The horizon was empty, bare rock, thin atmosphere, no structures, no monuments, no evidence of habitation. The planet's surface was exactly as uninhabited as it had always appeared. The vault's builders had been thorough in their erasure. They had left nothing above ground, nothing in orbit, nothing in the electromagnetic spectrum. The only trace of their existence was 110 meters beneath his feet, sealed behind tests that killed the unworthy, and a door that answered only to the species that had built it. "We tell them what the evidence says," Vane replied. "We tell them the elder race is not who we thought. We tell them the firstborn of the galaxy is sitting in the cheap seats of the conquered chamber, and they don't remember why they should be anywhere else." He paused and looked down at his own manipulators. The wrong shape, the wrong number of digits, the wrong species to open the final lock. "And then we ask them to send a human, because whatever is waiting behind that door has been waiting for 47,000 years, and it was never waiting for us."